at Piney Grove Baptist Church. This is Minister Justin Giboney. And as you know, we are reading in this Bible study, we are reading Urban Apologetics, trying to learn a little bit about restoring Black dignity with the gospel and why having an apologetic in the urban context in the Black church is important. Well, as you know, a few weeks ago, I had the opportunity to interview Jerome Gay. He kind of broke down the whitewashing of Christianity for us. And I have the honor today to bring Damon Richardson to come speak to us. I'm excited about this. I've shared the stage with this brother before. This brother is brilliant. He is a urban apologist. He is a speaker. He is a Bible teacher, and just does a really good job in, letting the body know what's really the truth and helping us grow within our apologetics and all that stuff. So I'm really excited about this conversation. Damon, thank you so much for joining us today, brother. How's everything going?
Hey, man, good to be on with you, Justin. And thanks so much for the opportunity. Everything is going well here, and just really excited about this interview, and really excited about learning that your church is going through the Urban Apologetics book. And that was our vision going into it, was to see this book literally become part of a church's reading process, that churches would go through it together, and that they would, in essence, become somewhat of a discipling tool. Mm-hmm. And so I'm really excited about hearing how that's actually working in different churches. We've gotten some great feedback already. Pastors who have literally purchased dozens of them for people in their church and walking through in study groups, and just hearing some of the testimonies of transformation in thinking, and how churches are becoming more apologetic in their posture, in not only their presentation of the gospel, but also in their defense of the faith. So, man, really excited about what you guys are doing.
Yeah, I'm excited about it too. Dr. Johnson, she actually chose the book before I even knew that she chose it. And when I saw the book, I was like, I know a couple of them brothers who wrote the book, so maybe I can get them to join. And again, we're happy that you did. Now, you wrote chapter 6. That was your contribution to this great book. And you start off talking about your experience in childhood in the Nation of Islam. Can you give us a little bit of your childhood and just kind of how you got into the faith?
Absolutely, yeah. So my father was the one who brought us into the Nation of Islam, and like many African-American men at that time, the Nation of Islam had a very large presence in the penal system, the prison and jail institutions. And my father had been exposed to the Nation of Islam prior to his incarceration. But when he became incarcerated, one of the things that the Nation of Islam, because they have such a strong rehabilitation program, men could get early release by essentially linking up with the Nation of Islam and going through their rehabilitation. Like, they were really looking to make men out of these men and get them on the right path. And so my father joined up with the Nation of Islam, became part of Fruit of Islam, and brought my family into it. So at this time, I'm essentially an infant. So I was literally, in reality, born and raised into the Nation of Islam. So it was already a part of my, how would I put it, my spiritual formation before I could even, before I knew it, so it was always there. And so, yeah, so growing up, we lived in New York. So we lived in Queens, and New York was essentially the cradle of the Nation of Islam, even though the headquarters was, was in Chicago. The famed Temple Number 7 was in Harlem. And this is where Malcolm had been. So we were in the Nation of Islam, essentially a post-Malcolm nation. Basically, I'd say probably about a good 6 or 7 years post-Malcolm. Okay. And so a lot of that stuff was still really, really new at the time. You just couldn't even mention Malcolm's name. Louis Farrakhan had taken his post at Temple Number 7. we belonged to a mosque or temple that Malcolm had started, which was actually not too far from where Malcolm lived. And I had a lot of family that lived in that same area of East Elmhurst, Queens, off of Astoria Boulevard and all that stuff. So he lived over there right on 97th, right down the street from one of my uncles. And so he started a seven, essentially it was called 7B. So it was an annex from Temple number 7 in Harlem. So we belonged to that one. And so the minister leading that one, we called him at that time, Minister Larry. But Minister Larry now is actually the international representative of the Nation of Islam, second to Minister Louis Farrakhan. And so to say that when we were in it, we were really in it. My mother was assistant captain over all of the MGT in Queens and Brooklyn. So the MGT is Muslim Girls Training. So this is the discipleship tool that they use for women, indoctrinating them and then teaching them, of course, how to be women according, so cooking and baking and doing all the things that fit the standard of Muslim women identity. So my mother was the assistant captain to the captain of MGT, and her territory covered Queens and Brooklyn. So yeah, so we were really in it. We were really in it. We learned their doctrine, and God just had a way of when he's got a call on you, it doesn't matter what you're in. It doesn't matter what you're part of. When God has a calling on you, he calls you from within that context, and he orchestrates events that pulls you, that draws you. When the Bible says no man comes to the Father except he first be drawn, that's real. God literally does this drawing. And when you start looking back over your life, you'll notice that there are things in your life that really precipitated and led to the decisions that you made to follow Christ. And so, yeah. So those are some of the things that happened there.
Wow, man. Well, thanks for sharing that personal story with us, bro. Tell us a little bit about just the background of the Nation of Islam. How does it come about? I know you got brothers like Noble Drew Ali, W.D. Fard, Elijah Muhammad. Tell us just a little bit about the background and history of Nation of Islam.
Yeah, so Restorationism as an idea was really, really popular in the I would say your mid to late 19th century and early 20th century. So Restorationism was really more this idea that Christianity had failed and that God was really looking for a new remnant, restoring some original ideas that Christianity had failed to uphold. Christianity had really apostatized and really needed to be abandoned. So that was kind of an idea that really led to pretty much most of your cults. So when it led to Mormonism, it led to Seventh-day Adventism, it led to the Watchtower Society of the Jehovah's Witness, it led to the Stone Campbell revival, which ultimately birthed the Churches of Christ. It led to essentially oneness Pentecostalism as well. Parham's idea of missionary tongues and that kind of thing. All those are restorationist ideas. Well, right around that same time, in the early 30s, so not only do you have Hebrew Israelism beginning to emerge, or having already emerged at least 30 years earlier, and really taking root around this same time with a lot of these same restorationist ideas. Noble Drew Ali, in Detroit and in the Chicago area, began to teach this identity that, hey, listen, I know who Black people in America really are. And he taught a number of things. Not only did he teach that Black people were Moors, he also taught that Black people were the true Jews as well, and that they were also truly Muslims by nature. So he taught kind of a goulash of ideas about Black identity, that we were the true Israelites or the true Jews, and that we were also truly Muslim. And he developed this thing called the Circle 7 Quran, which was his adaptation of the Quran. Essentially, it was his revision. And Ali's idea, ultimately, one of his students was W.D. Fard, a white man who had a biracial father and a white mother from Jasper, Texas. That's where he was from. He was no mystery man from the East. He wasn't from New Zealand and none of these other places. He was born in Jasper, Texas, according to two census that had been taken, one when he was 13 years old. So we know where he lived, where he was born, and where he ultimately moved around using different names like W.D. Farad and all these different things. He lived in L.A., he lived in Seattle, and a number of these places. Well, ultimately, he migrated to Detroit, where he met Noble Drew Ali and became fascinated with this notion of Black uplift. Now, something obviously was going on in his life because he had always identified as white. And by all appearances, he really was. Only his father was biracial. His mom was white and he was white. That's how he ethnically identified. Something happened to where he became attracted to this message and began to teach a brand of his own, because by 33, Noble Drew Ali's movement of the Moore Science Temple had fractured, and there were a number of offshoots, and there was some internal friction going on in the leadership. So W.D. Fard took a section of that group and started the Lost Found Nation of Islam in Detroit. So it copied a lot of Noble Drew Ali's original ideas, but then he added some ideas onto it. And so he started teaching that Black people in America was essentially the lost tribe of Shabazz, which he taught was some God tribe that essentially came here, but their identity was lost. They're really a God tribe, and that he called Shabazz, and kind of like a lot like the Mormons with the tribe of Moroni and all these other so-called indigenous people that there's no archaeological or historical evidence for. Fard did the very same thing and essentially gave Black people a false identity, a false cosmology, and a false history centered around this idea that we're really a God people. And that idea caught on. And his prize student was Elijah Muhammad, who lived right here in Georgia, where I am, and but a couple hours south. And so he lived in a town called Sandersville, Georgia. And his family migrated during the time. So remember, just like I had family that migrated to New York and to Philly right around 1930, right around 30 to 33.
Great migration.
He migrated to Detroit right around that same time. That's that great migration that we talk about. And he heard that message. His wife heard the message, and they became students of Fard in Detroit at the Nation of Islam Temple #1. They bought into the idea, and he became Minister Elijah Muhammad. And ultimately, when Fard was arrested, the leadership passed to Elijah, who was his top student. And so Elijah then takes Fard's ideas, keeps some of them, and adds to it. So by the time Elijah is now the leader, Fard is not simply a prophet of Noble Drew Ali. Fard is actually Allah, and he, Elijah Muhammad, is the prophet or the messenger of Allah. So you can see how from one leader to the other, the narrative starts developing, and the leader becomes more prominent depending upon who's at the helm of leadership. And you could see how the theology continues to change and to develop.
What is the Nation of Islam theology in a nutshell? If you had to describe what their theology is, and theology is their understanding of God.
Yeah, it's actually henotheistic, which is really incredible, because you would think, so we used to say, God is a man, not a spirit or a spook. Never has God been a spirit or a spook. God is a man. God is a man. So we taught, first of all, that God is not a spiritual entity, that he's a human, and that there have been many gods before, right? So, but the interesting thing is that they're constantly screaming that there's one God, which they obviously get from Orthodox Islam Shahada. But the true view of God in Nation of Islam theology is really henotheistic. That is the idea of one God at a time, but that there have been many gods before. So they don't deny the existence of these other gods. They just deny that there's only one reigning God or one God supreme at a time. And so, for instance, in their theology, the original Allah of creation died. So they're not eternal. They don't live forever. So that one died, and then another one came into power. And so this is where they talk about, of course, the council of the 70 gods and all. So they borrow a lot of the language, like 72 elders. They borrow a lot of that kind of language and then wrap it into their cosmology. And so ultimately, Fard became one of the gods in that lineage of other gods who existed before him, which is how they ended up calling him God in person, right? So it's not monotheistic at all. It's really henotheistic.
And they don't believe in the afterlife. Is that correct? Or...
They never did when Elijah Muhammad was around, but conveniently now, after Elijah Muhammad died, there's an afterlife, because now they needed to be able to posit how after 76, 77, when Elijah Muhammad died, they started teaching that he's just absent. That's their way of saying he's not dead. He's just not here with us. Okay. And so they started teaching that he's really aboard this mothership, with these UFOs, or this mothership that Allah is going to use to destroy white devils in the Battle of Armageddon. Well, Elijah Muhammad is piloting that ship, and righteous Black people are aboard. Now, interestingly, that's a Farrakhan development. But when Elijah Muhammad was around, he clearly taught that there was no such thing as an afterlife, that was a Christian invention, that he was a true materialist, just like the Sadducees were. When you're dead, you're done. But now, as Louis Farrakhan is the leader, they do have this kind of afterlife theology where it's not just a resurrection of the mind now. It's a resurrection, a bodily resurrection, where righteous Black people who have embraced the message of Elijah Muhammad, that they will be saved. So in reality, whereas they didn't really have a real soteriology or a doctrine of salvation, they seem to have one now that's really more eschatological and rooted in an afterlife. Okay. Again, another development from one leader to the next. And so a lot of this theology conveniently develops every so many years, 10, 15 years, you find this new development in their thinking.
Is another new development, because I hear this from Farrakhan sometimes. Farrakhan will talk about Jesus as a prophet. Is that something that NOI has always done, or is that another kind of innovation of his?
Yeah, that's another innovation. So when Elijah was the leader, the Lamb of God, or the Jesus that he saw as the historical Jesus, was Master. They called him Master Fard Muhammad. So they taught this idea that the historical Jesus failed, and so essentially this kind of so Jesus and Christ are two distinct things. So the Spirit of Christ was in the historical Jesus, but because he failed, that Spirit of Christ came upon Muhammad from Mecca, and he failed also, and ultimately that Spirit of Christ came upon Fard. And so they taught that Fard is actually now the true Jesus. Well, when Elijah died, Farrakhan started teaching that Elijah Muhammad is the true Jesus. And so when he was accepting an award, and you hear it all the time, so you don't even need to go back years and years and years, but he's often said Jesus wasn't born in Bethlehem. He was born in Sandersville, Georgia, the birthplace of Elijah Muhammad. So when he says, "I know my Redeemer lives," he's talking about Elijah Muhammad. Again, another example that they don't really think that Elijah Muhammad is dead. that he is alive, that he is present in another sense, or absent physically, but present in a different sense. And suddenly now there's this spookism that they used to talk about was a Christian invention. Well, suddenly they believe in spirits now and that kind of thing. So you could see how conveniently they change up. So, they do use a lot of the same language, Jesus, Savior, and Redeemer, and all that other stuff, but they're really pouring in different meanings. So for the current Nation of Islam under Louis Farrakhan, Elijah Muhammad is the true Jesus. He's the one who succeeded in doing what Jesus of Nazareth failed to do. And that's how they actually teach it. And they say, essentially, when Jesus realized that he failed, he conceded and gave himself over to Jerusalem authorities so that they could kill him, because he realized that he had failed in his mission. But Elijah Muhammad succeeded in doing what Jesus was incapable of doing. He is the true Jesus.
Yeah, I mean, so we see that the theology is kind of all over its place. You have these, reiterations, and we know that it's flawed. It's not the truth, right? It's kind of fit.
That's exactly right.
to fit the culture and to fit, whatever they needed at the time. But let me say this: we know that there is common grace. So even people who have a flawed theology, don't know the true God, don't know Jesus, can have certain insights. One of the things that's always interested me, I don't know if that's right to put, one thing that I've always saw within the Nation of Islam is its ability to discipline some of the roughest, toughest, hard-headed brothers that you've ever seen, right? Like it's drawn people in, the self-reliance and really the conservative social nature of what the Nation of Islam has been able to do to accomplish that discipline. Can you talk a little bit about how they've been able to do that?
Absolutely. By creating several things. One, a sense of dignity, because wrapped up in identity is dignity. And it's interesting because, that's what we're after in this book, restoring Black dignity with the gospel. So inherent in this need to recover a proper identity that they attempt to plot in a false history and a false cosmology, they also want to recover dignity, because African Americans had been historically subjected to all kinds of inhumane treatment, atrocity, so forth and so on, which psychologically devastated Black self perception, right? And so one of the ways that the Nation of Islam brings about a sense of dignity is by creating something that is respectable, something that we own. So we had fish markets and, Shabazz Bakery and all these different things. We own that. And there was this constant do for self kind of theme running through all of that, which was restoring this sense of, again, dignity and pride and self-worth, and saying, don't ever allow yourself to look at yourself through the lens of society. Look at yourself through your own lens, your own sense of dignity and self-worth. And in that, they were really attempting to fill in a vacuum that I think the church had not properly addressed. Mm-hmm. It's just that they went about doing it with the wrong message, the wrong methodology, and just the wrong information. But they were attempting in reality to actually do that. So when people weren't used to seeing Black men in very orderly, dignified ways, that's where the bow tie came from. Right. When we think of bow ties, we think of, a black and white affair, something formal, right? And the bow tie, oh, wow, that's distinguished. That was their idea. We want to be distinct and distinguished, to show dignity, order, and structure, and present a different picture and image of Black people to the world. I think that idea in and of itself is a wonderful idea. It's just not helpful overall when you are creating false histories and false narratives and false identities in order to accomplish that. And yeah, I mean, it was something to be reckoned with when you see this massive group of African Americans. My mom was a baker. She baked not only bean pies, but these natural carrot cake and this, that, and the other. They were seamstresses. They were doing things essentially nation building.
Right.
Nation building. And all that was really, really wonderful. And it really caused other Black people saying, we've never seen this before. What's interesting is that they were looking right past the church as an institution, saying, we've never seen this before, crediting to the Nation of Islam something that, when in reality, they had seen it. It's just that the Nation of Islam was a lot more confronting to the culture in the way that it went about establishing this identity and this dignity. And that resonated with the anger that African Americans had and the disdain that they had towards their treatment, whereas the church was really wanting to kind of suffocate the disdain part and the anger part. Whereas the Nation of Islam was saying, no, we need to give voice to that. And they did by creating a theology of white devils that really resonated with this sense of, well, if whites are devils and Black people are righteous by nature, that really gave them an even greater sense of pride. But it's kind of like somebody trying to make themselves appear taller by pressing down on the guy that's right next to them. So it's really a false sense of dignity. We really don't need to denigrate another group of people ethnically in order to see ourselves as great. So that's kind of, the structure behind the dignity piece in the Nation of Islam. And in some senses, it did appear good. It did give Black people this sense of self-worth and all of that. But again, when it's all rooted in falsehood, it's going to crumble. It's not going to be good long-term. And that's what we ultimately see in their history.
Yeah, that's helpful, man. Yeah. That's strong. I remember I had a cousin who converted to the Nation of Islam. He since has left when I was younger. As the last question on this part, what would you say to Christians confronting Nation of Islam? How should Christians respond to what the nation, to their theology, just to what the Nation of Islam represents?
Yeah, so oftentimes Nation of Islam is really built on a lot of the sentiment that you find in the urban context. Elijah Muhammad was the one that really strongly pushed this notion that Christianity is the white man's religion. And so what Christians can do that I think is incredibly effective is to see the Nation of Islam never defends their view. They never argue in defense of their view. Their way of arguing is constantly punching holes in Christianity. By knowing this, you can posit that in reality, the Nation of Islam is a white man's religion, predicated on white supremacy and even Black supremacist kind of thinking. They actually held to both. In Nation of Islam history, Elijah Muhammad had made deals with white supremacist organizations so that those organizations would economically fund the Nation of Islam as long as they all agreed to be separatist. So all of that stuff about do for self, the reality is that while the Nation of Islam was generating money through the Muhammad Speaks and bean pie sales and things like that, most of the money that it generated to buy all this land in Arizona and in Indiana and all these places, farmland, well, that came from white people. That came from white supremacists. And that is a very known history. That is not something, and Malcolm talks about that in an interview a month before he was assassinated, how he met with the Atlanta minister of the Nation of Islam. And I mean, this was just months before he was killed.
Yeah.
And they were sitting right in that minister's home with a head person from the Ku Klux Klan, talking about how they can work together in the interest of separatism, right? So we've got to be able to call them out on those things, point out that in reality, Christianity is not the white man's religion. That honor really belongs to the Nation of Islam. Demonstrate biblical Christianity has always embraced all nations, and demonstrate the African presence in Christianity in its origin story, right? So we don't find Christianity showing up in Africa with the slave trade. We find Christianity in Africa from the very beginning of the emergence of that gospel movement. And we've got evidence for that. So we've got to be able to push back and make them prove their historical claims about Jesus and their historical claims about their theology, their cosmology. In other words, challenge them epistemologically. How do you know what you know? Whereas when we're basing our claims not only in scripture, but we're also basing our claims in the abundance of evidence that actually verifies what we read in scripture, historically, archaeologically, so forth and so on. The Nation of Islam never allows themselves to be in the position to have to answer to what they really believe. So they never really do apologetics. So we've got to the Christian has to put their back up against the rope and say, okay, this is what you believe, defend it. Argue in defense of it. Why do you believe that? What is the evidence for this, that, and the other? So we've got to turn into the questioners so that they can then begin to see not only the inconsistency, but the fallacies in the things that they actually believe. But typically, they're the ones in the other seat, having Christians running around, proving this, proving that, answering this question. And that is the number one way that Christians can really as they say, it's no fun when the rabbit's got the gun. We've got to turn it back on them and make them defend the veracity of Nation of Islam teaching.
Yeah, and that's a great point you make. Not only do we have the Bible that sets out exactly why Christianity is legitimate, but we have archaeology and science and all these other things to back it up. Very important point. And thank you for all that background on the Nation of Islam. I'm running out of time, but very quickly.
Oh, yeah.
Can we also talk about the Hebrew Israelites, generally what they believe, and I know there's some differences.
Yeah,
generally what they believe and why are they wrong? Just so we can get we're not going to be able to dive that deep. But
there we go. Oh man, we'll have to do this again, man. But
right.
Yeah, generally they all agree that Deuteronomy 28 is prophecy.
So thank you so much for that background on the Nation of Islam. Really quick, can we also talk a little bit about the Hebrew Israelites, what they believe, and why it's inaccurate, if you could just briefly.
Absolutely. So, in a nutshell, most Hebrew Israelites believe that the identity of Black West Africans are truly Israel, that they're truly Hebrews that emigrated there after the diaspora. So they don't believe that West Africans, that is our ancestors, are actually African. They think Africans are a different group of people, but we're really Israelites, and so for them, Jewish people are actually the imposters. Those are the Ashkenazi or the European kind of Jews. But their ideas is that Deuteronomy 28 is really prophetic of the failure of Black or Jewish, I should say, Israelites in keeping the law. And what Yahweh does is causes them to go into slavery as a result. And so salvation for them is getting Black people in the context of America and wherever Black people are in the diaspora to accept the law so that we can please Yahweh and find salvation in that identity, a recovering of the lost identity. So in reality, there is no salvation in Hebrew Israelism apart from this recovery of this lost identity and this flawed eschatology, which suggests that once West Africans here in America recover their identity, in the kingdom, they are going to be the true slave owners, and God is going to punish the former slave owners and their descendants by making them captives and slaves in the kingdom. So, so in a nutshell, it's really just law teaching, and again, another kind of identity complex based, what you would call ethnic superiority identity complex. Whereas at the end of the day, being special and being accepted by God is rooted in who you are. And if you are Israel, then that's good. If you are not, then that's bad. And so what they want all Blacks to accept is this idea that we are really Israel, and we really need to get back to keeping the law so that our ways pleases Yahweh. And as a result, we will not be destroyed when he returns. So that's kind of in a nutshell. There's a number of other things that they believe, some that differs from one camp to the other. But for the most part, they all believe that Deuteronomy 28 is prophetic of what ultimately happened in the transatlantic slave trade, and that group of people is essentially us. And wherever they went, whether they went into the Caribbean or this, that, or the other, these are just different tribes of Israel. And that the ones that came to America are really the tribe of Judah. So it's really getting back to essentially ethnic triumphalism, finding identity and hope and salvation in recognizing that you're truly an Israelite. That's all they have to offer.
David, man, thank you so much for your time, brother. You did an awesome job, knocked it out the park. Again, we are talking about urban apologetics. This is David Richardson. And give me the name of your ministry.
Urban Logia. And you can find me on YouTube primarily, and also urbanlogia.org. That is our web home, where we offer essentially seminars on church history, on apologetics, biblical studies, and things of that nature, trying to help really fill in gaps, learning gaps in an urban context, to help people really make better informed connections to what they believe and why.
Thank you, brother. Greater Piney Grove, it really appreciates what you've done, and I look to be collaborating with you soon, brother. Take care now.
Absolutely. Thanks again.
They say this mountain can't be moved. They say these chains